The neighborhood of Willow Creek was known for its perfect lawns, pristine sidewalks, and a homeowners association that watched over every detail like hawks circling the skies. It was the kind of place where the grass had to be trimmed to a certain length, where houses had to be painted in approved shades, and where even trash cans were expected to be brought in at precise hours. For most people, these rules were manageable. But for Daniel Carter, they became the battleground of a war he never wanted, because of one woman, Karen Miller. Daniel had lived in Willow Creek for nearly 5 years. He wasn't loud, he wasn't messy, and he wasn't the type to start trouble. He worked from home as a contractor, spent his evenings with his loyal German Shepherd, Max, and kept his property in better shape than most. But none of that mattered, because his corner lot meant one thing: high visibility. And when Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA board, drove her white SUV around the neighborhood, Daniel's home was always in her line of sight. At first, the conflict was small. Karen would slow her car and glare whenever Daniel's trash can sat too close to the curb. She would scribble passive-aggressive notes on HOA letterhead and tape them to his front door, warning him about proper trash placement. Daniel ignored most of it, tossing the notes into the very trash can that cause the drama. But Karen wasn't the type to be ignored. It started with the knocking. Each trash day, when Daniel placed his can out like every other neighbor, he would wake the next morning to find it tipped over. The contents spilled across his driveway. He knew it wasn't random. The wind didn't push cans uphill. The local raccoons didn't scatter coffee grounds only on his lawn. No, this was deliberate. And though he never saw her do it, he knew exactly who was behind it: Karen Miller. Her smug looks whenever she drove past told him all he needed to know. The faint smirk on her face when she slowed down to inspect his home. The way her heels clicked dramatically across his sidewalk when she delivered yet another warning note. It was a signature move. And each time, Daniel's patience thinned. Still, Daniel was a man who valued calm over chaos. He told himself it wasn't worth escalating. He cleaned up the mess, righted the trash can, and went on with his day. But Karen thrived on reactions, and when she didn't get one, she doubled down. Soon, it wasn't just once a week. She began tipping his can at random times, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes during the day, right after he had set it out. Once, Daniel even heard the faint hollow thud of plastic hitting pavement while sipping coffee on his porch, only to spot Karen's SUV slowly rolling away down the block. Max growled that morning, his ears perked toward the street. Daniel rubbed the dog's head. "I know, buddy. She wants a fight." It wasn't long before Karen escalated her campaign. On one particular Thursday, Daniel stepped outside to find his trash can not just tipped over, but dragged across the street into the neighbor's yard. A bold move, one that left no doubt. The neighbors whispered. Some shook their heads at the nonsense. Others smiled knowingly, as though enjoying the free entertainment. But Daniel knew this was more than petty drama. It was a test. Karen was waiting for him to snap, to lose his temper so she could wield the full power of the HOA against him. But Daniel wasn't about to play into her hands. Instead, he watched. He observed. And he waited for the right moment to strike back. Weeks passed, the battle escalating in small but deliberate steps. Each time Daniel thought she had tired of the game, she returned with renewed energy. One morning, he caught sight of her reflection in the sub's window as she leaned out of her car, her perfectly manicured hand shoving at the can with unnecessary force, laughing to herself as it toppled over. Daniel didn't move. He simply watched from behind the curtains, memorizing every detail. The seed of a plan formed in his mind. But before he could put it into motion, Karen made her biggest mistake yet. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows across Willow Creek. Daniel had just finished mowing his lawn when he heard the familiar sound of a car pulling up. He glanced toward the curb. Karen's SUV had stopped directly in front of his house. She stepped out, her heels striking the pavement with sharp cracks. Her orange blazer blazed against the green backdrop of manicured lawns as she strutted toward his trash can, which he had rolled out early for Monday collection. Daniel leaned on his mower, wiping sweat from his brow, watching. Karen didn't even notice him there. She kicked the can with the side of her heel, sending it sprawling into the grass. The lid flipped open, scattering clippings across the sidewalk. She brushed her hands together as if dusting off a chore, then turned back toward her car. That smug look again. That satisfied grin. And that was when Daniel decided enough was enough. The next morning, he began working quietly. He reinforced his trash can, making subtle adjustments that looked ordinary from the outside but hid something much stronger beneath. He added weight to its base, securing it in ways that would make it nearly impossible to tip without significant force. To anyone else, it was just another trash can. But to Daniel, it was a trap, an immovable object waiting for the unstoppable force of Karen's arrogance. He didn't need to tell anyone. He didn't need to announce his plan. All he had to do was wait. And wait he did. By the following week, Karen returned to her routine. Each day she drove by, slowing just enough to inspect his home. Each day, Daniel's stood proudly, unmoved, like a soldier on guard duty. Karen's scowl deepened. Her attempts grew bolder. She shoved at it one morning while out for a walk, only to find it resisted her touch. She tried again another evening, this time with both hands, but it wouldn't budge. Her frustration boiled beneath her carefully painted exterior. And then, one fateful evening, it happened. The street was quiet. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, and the glow of streetlights cast eerie halos across the cul-de-sac. Daniel sat on his porch with Max at his feet, a mug of coffee in hand, when he heard the low hum of Karen's SUV approaching. He didn't move. He simply watched as the vehicle slowed, her headlights washing over the curb. She didn't get out this time. No, Karen was done with half measures. She revved the engine once, then again, and with a sudden surge, she jerked the wheel toward the curb, aiming her SUV directly at the trash can. Daniel's grip on the mug tightened. Max let out a low growl, ears flattening. The SUV struck with a deafening crash. Sparks flew as metal met the reinforced can. The front bumper crumpled, the hood jolting upward as the can refused to move, its weighted base holding fast. The sound echoed down the street, drawing neighbors from their homes. Karen stumbled out of the vehicle, her face twisted in shock and rage as she pointed at the wreckage. "You totaled my car," she screamed, her voice cutting through the night. Daniel stayed seated, calm as ever, steam rising from his mug. He looked at her with a steady gaze, his voice even as he finally spoke. "Didn't I warn you?" Blue and red lights flashed in the distance, growing brighter as a police cruiser pulled onto the street. Officer Bradley stepped out, his hand resting casually on his notepad as he surveyed the scene. The neighbors gathered, murmuring among themselves, some covering smiles, others shaking their heads. Karen sputtered, her words tripping over themselves as she tried to explain. But the evidence was clear. Her SUV sat mangled against the unbroken trash can. Its once perfect white paint now scarred with streaks of blackened metal and sparks. And Daniel, he simply sat there, sipping his coffee, Max at his side, watching the chaos unfold exactly as he had known it would. The war wasn't over yet, but this battle, this night, belonged entirely to him. The night air in Willow Creek was tense, humming with whispers and the faint crackle of police radios. The white SUV sat crooked against the curb, its hood bent upward, steam hissing from the engine. The trash can, impossibly upright, stood victorious in the glow of the streetlight, as if it had endured a battlefield assault. Neighbors lingered at the edges of their lawns, clutching mugs, folding arms, or hiding grins behind hands. Everyone had known there was friction between Daniel and Karen, but no one expected it to end like this. Officer Bradley stepped forward, his boots crunching against the pavement as he surveyed the scene. He took in the sparks still sizzling where Karen's bumper had kissed the reinforced can, the dog sitting calmly on the porch, the man who hadn't moved an inch since it happened. Daniel Carter looked more like a spectator than a victim, calm, collected, and unreadable. Karen, however, was a storm contained in human form. Her orange blazer flared as she gestured wildly, her voice pitched high with fury. This is sabotage. He did this on purpose. Look at it. That trash can is a weapon. The neighbors snickered quietly. The word weapon hung in the air, almost comical in its absurdity. Officer Bradley raised an eyebrow, jotting something in his notebook. He said evenly. From what I can see, you drove your vehicle into a stationary object. Karen gasped as if he had struck her. Stationary? That thing is reinforced. He rigged it to destroy cars. You have to do something. Her finger jabbed in Daniel's direction. All eyes turned to the man on the porch. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He simply took a slow sip of coffee, the steam rising between him and the chaos unfolding below. I warned her, Daniel said at last, his voice low but clear enough to carry across the yard. She wouldn't stop knocking it over. I told her she'd regret it. Karen's face twisted in disbelief. You admit it. You admit you set me up. But Officer Bradley shook his head. What I hear is a homeowner warning a neighbor to stop harassing his property. And what I see, he gestured toward the SUV, is evidence that you ignored that warning and made a choice that caused damage to your own vehicle. The murmurs among the crowd grew louder now. Some neighbors nodded in agreement. Others whispered gleefully, eager to recount every detail later. Karen's power had always come from perception, from the way she commanded fear through HOA notices and threats of fines. But in this moment, standing beside her ruined car while the community watched, that power cracked like a shattered windshield. Still, Karen wasn't one to surrender easily. Her voice shook, not from fear but from rage. This is harassment. He's been targeting me since the day he moved in. You people don't see it, but I know he's dangerous. The words fell flat. Dangerous? Daniel Carter, sitting on his porch with a coffee mug and a dog? The image didn't fit. If anything, the one who looked unhinged was Karen herself. Officer Bradley exhaled slowly, closing his notebook. I'm going to need to see your license and registration. What? You can't be serious. Serious as a crash report, he replied firmly. You operated a vehicle in a reckless manner, and now there's damage. Whether or not the trash can was reinforced doesn't change. The fact that you're responsible for hitting it. Her protests echoed into the night, but the officer's tone left no room for argument. As she fumbled for her paperwork, Daniel leaned down to scratch Max behind the ears. The dog wagged his tail, sensing his owner's quiet satisfaction. The neighbors began to disperse, drifting back toward their homes, but not before throwing lingering looks, some sympathetic, others entertained. The story would ripple through the neighborhood by morning. By the next HOA meeting, it would be legend. When Officer Bradley finally left, towing arrangements set for Karen's disabled SUV, Daniel rose from the porch. He carried his mug inside, closing the door softly behind him. He didn't need to celebrate. The night had spoken for itself. But the war was not over. In the days that followed, Karen doubled her efforts. The wreck of her SUV seemed to fuel her obsession rather than deter it. She stormed into HOA meetings, waving her arms, demanding Daniel be fined, punished, even expelled from the community. She claimed he had weaponized a trash can, that he was a menace, a threat to safety. The board listened politely, but the tide of opinion had shifted. One by one, neighbors spoke up. They recounted how often they'd seen Karen shoving Daniel's can, how she lingered around his property, how her SUV had practically launched itself at an inanimate object. Whispers turned into testimonies. The queen of the HOA was losing her crown. Daniel attended none of these meetings. He didn't need to. His silence was its own weapon, leaving Karen to unravel under the weight of her own accusations. One evening, as he sat again on his porch, the sound of footsteps approached. It was Officer Bradley, off duty now, his patrol car nowhere in sight. He offered a nod of greeting, settling onto the step beside Daniel. Quite a show the other night, the officer said, glancing toward the street where the incident had occurred. Daniel gave a faint smile. She had it coming. Maybe so, but you've got to be careful. Folks like her, they don't give up easy. They'll burn their own house down if it means watching the smoke choke someone else. Daniel considered that, his eyes narrowing. Then I'll just have to make sure the wind's in my favor. The two men sat in silence for a while, Max lying between them. the quiet of the neighborhood wrapping around them like a heavy blanket. But Karen wasn't done. 2 nights later, Daniel woke to the sound of rustling outside. Max's low growl confirmed it wasn't just the wind. Daniel moved to the window, peering through the curtains. And there she was, Karen, creeping across his yard with a flashlight, snapping pictures of the reinforced trash can though gathering evidence for a case only she believed in. Daniel didn't rush out. He didn't call the police. Instead, he let her finish, watching as she scuttled back to her driveway, clutching the images like stolen treasure. He knew what would happen next, and he was right. The following morning, Daniel received a thick envelope on his doorstep, stamped with the HOA seal. Inside was a formal notice, accusing him of violating community safety standards. The claim: constructing a hazardous structure disguised as waste containment. Daniel chuckled as he read it, shaking his head. The words dripped with Karen's fingerprints. No one else would write such nonsense. But Daniel was ready. He drafted a reply, calm and measured, citing HOA regulations line by line. He pointed out that his trash can met all size, color, and placement requirements. He noted that reinforcements for stability were not prohibited. He even attached photographs of 3 other neighbors who had weighted their cans with sand to prevent wind from toppling them, evidence that his can was not unusual. He copied the letter to every member of the board. Within 48 hours, the case was dismissed. The news hit Karen like a thunderclap. Her SUV was gone, her reputation in tatters, her evidence rendered worthless. For the first time in years, her control over the neighborhood slipped through her fingers like sand. The final blow came at the next HOA election. Attendance was unusually high, neighbors whispering in tight groups before the meeting began. When nominations were called, Karen's name was put forward as usual, but for the first time. So was another, Daniel Carter. He hadn't asked for it. He hadn't even planned to attend. But the neighbors, tired of Karen's reign, pushed his name onto the ballot. And when the votes were counted, the result was undeniable. Karen Miller was ousted. Daniel Carter was elected to the board. The shift was seismic. Rules didn't vanish overnight, but the spirit of the community changed. The whispers of fear that once followed Karen became jokes shared over fences. Neighbors smiled more, spoke more freely. And for the first time in years, Willow Creek felt like home again. Karen's fury burned bright but brief. She sold her house within 3 months, retreating from the neighborhood that had turned against her. When the moving truck pulled away, Daniel stood on his porch with Max, sipping coffee, watching silently. He didn't wave. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Because in the end, Karen had destroyed herself. All it took was a trash can she couldn't beat.